So we're not only going to cover exemptions on real estate taxes here for seniors today, we're going to cover many other things that have to do with seniors and the different challenges that they come up against. And today I have with me Gennady Litvin. He is an attorney at Moshe's Law. And tell us a little bit about what you do there at that firm in about 60 seconds or less, please, Gennady. Can you hear me, Gennady?
I can.
Okay.
Thank you, Annette. So like Annette mentioned, my name is Gennady Litvin. I am an attorney, managing attorney from Moshe's Law PC. One of my primary roles at the firm is to handle real estate matters, whether they be real estate matters that are of transfers of real estate or of purchases and sales, foreclosure defense, and representations of retail and commercial properties. We have some experience with aging in place, as Annette will further discuss as part of today's show. And thank you, Annette, for having us on today.
You're welcome. So, Gennady, can you tell us a little bit about some of the different things that seniors might be missing out on when it comes to lowering their overhead in a home?
Thank you for that question. It gives me a great opportunity to speak, and attorneys love the sound of their own voice. Your income tax and your capital gains will differ when you are in a lower income tax bracket, if that's a move that you will make once you retire. And that's what happens a lot of times to people that are moving on to pensions, that are moving on to other type of fixed income. Their income begins to lower, and that means that we go into a lower tax bracket. And upon the sale of our home, if we do have capital gains taxes that we're exposed to, again, something to speak to an accountant about, it will be at a lower rate because of you being in a lower income bracket. Does that make sense, Ann?
Yes, it sure does. And so if a person, so this has to do with their actual, I guess, income tax bracket and capital gains we're referring to, right?
Yes, that's correct. And that's what we're talking about, to see what are our expenses on the sale of the home, but for the typical expenses such as um, transfer taxes. So when anyone sells in New York City, we've got transfer taxes. Those transfer taxes, if the property is over $500,000, are going to be 1.8425%, 1.825%. I apologize. That is also something that's going to be added on top of. Let's say you have a real estate agent that's representing you on the sale of the property. That's another 4 to 6%. So typically we say in the industry that it's approximately 8% of the sale price that are going to be your closing costs. Then you've got to worry about the income tax ramifications of capital gains, if there are going to be any, if you don't fall into certain exemptions that may exist.
And what if someone has a multifamily home? It could be that they lived in it, but they rented apartments out. Does it matter, like, if they sell the house, maybe they refinanced it over the years and now they have a larger mortgage? Let's say they've got $1 million house and maybe they have a $700,000 mortgage. They refinanced it. Couple years go by and now they're in a situation where they have to sell because they're older. It's not safe maybe for them to be there. Like, how do they deal with that? Should maybe, I mean, obviously they need to call an accountant because we're not giving tax advice. What we're trying to make folks be aware of is, what questions would you be asking an accountant, right? So, Gennady, what's your little take on that?
Great questions to have readily available for you when you're speaking or interviewing accountants for this situation are going to be, what type of evidence should I be keeping for expenses on my property? You and your potential or existing accountant want to account for all of the expenses that have been invested in the property to hopefully mitigate the taxes that you would have to be responsible for upon the sale. Now, if you have a high mortgage, Like you gave an example of 700,000 and you're selling it for 1 million. And what we're talking about is you have a $300,000 difference there. You're taking 8% of our sale prices, our closing costs. So that's $80,000. So that's 300 minus 80. We're already at $220,000 that's coming down to us before any expenses are accounted for in terms of improvements and renovations in the building. That would actually almost be, I believe that would not be taxable income because of the exemption that is allowed for homestead in New York City. And again, everything to be confirmed and discussed with accountants. We're just using a very bird's eye view for this conversation.
Right. So just to disclose here, I am a real estate broker in New York, in Brooklyn specifically, and we're talking about a commercial type of property where a portion of it was commercial. So when talking to the accountant, another thing you need to be asking about is the tax basis. Because if you have a two-family and you've been writing off half of your expenses because it was a two-family, your tax basis is what they consider to be the value that they're going to use at the time of sale for accounting purposes. And so you might actually owe less than your tax basis could be lower if you're alive than when you actually bought the property originally. So the thing you need to be asking the accountant about is, what kind of bills do I need to save? Like Gennady said, there are regular repairs that you might take off each year, but then there might be capital improvements which get applied to what you need to pay in capital gain taxes. And then you need to be aware, don't just go sell your house without talking to that accountant, because you could end up owing taxes on monies where you already depreciated the value of the property. Because that's one of the benefits of having a commercial property, right? Is that each year you could take a percentage depending upon the type of property and say, okay, I take this off on my income taxes because the building is depreciating. It might be appreciating, right? Which has been the case for, if you own it a really long time, usually it will have appreciated, but that depreciation of the asset or depreciation on the tax roll, not depletion, but depreciation, can actually reduce it, and you could have to pay more. So it might not have been 700. It might have been that you had the house for 30 years and you depreciated it from when you bought it at, 700,000, but maybe you took off depreciation of 600 over the years. So now they're going to say the property might only be worth 600. That's why you have to talk to an accountant. You shouldn't just necessarily take it for the information from a real estate person, because the rules change and the accountant is going to know the most up-to-date rules. So
Absolutely. CYA. I like that CYA.
Yes. So back to you on talking about the market conditions. You were mentioning about maybe paying cash. So like, what if a person has a home and maybe they have paid off that home and now they want to buy another home, but most people would not take that as their contract contingent upon selling your current home. So is there anything you could suggest for a person like that in that kind of situation?
Great question. It's happening very often these days. We are seeing contingencies upon the successful sale of a home inserted into purchase contracts more and more these days. And the reason for that is because this market is ripe for thinking outside the box to make deals happen and make transactions move forward. We don't have the most flattering interest rates right now, so that is affecting both purchasers that are borrowers and sellers that are looking to purchase on the way out. That means that inventory is being frozen by the sellers that won't sell unless they can buy, and that means that this market is turning, as we have seen. Now, in order for a seller to require to have to sell their house while they are also looking for a purchase, the first thing we always say is, do you have any place to go once you sell your home if the purchase doesn't succeed? Most of the time, the answer is no, especially when we're dealing with an older homeowner. And the reason for that is kids are still young that are outside the house, and they themselves have studios or one bedrooms that the parents will never move in with. If that's the case, that's what we are seeing more and more often. So we always prepare the seller and the homeowner for the fact that you can't put your house on the market until you have an exit strategy. So that's first. Second question that we always ask is, can you afford to purchase the property without selling yours right now? So what we are trying to achieve there is live out the purchase of your property in your current home. And once you move into the new home that you buy, whether it's with other income or another loan for an investment property, as long as you can qualify and you can purchase that home without selling your existing home, we sometimes do recommend for the sale of the home to not begin until after the purchase closes. Those are the safety net questions for us. Now, typically what happens, of course, is we are not always able to purchase a new home without selling our current home. So we don't have that luxury. So what we have to negotiate with the purchasers of our sale of our is that we need time in our home after we close on the sale. And essentially, what we call in the industry, it is post possession, meaning that after closing, we have a certain amount of time in our home until whatever period we include in the contract. That gives us an opportunity to sell, receive money for that sale, and use that money to purchase our home or to finish the purchase of our future home. Now, typically, this is how it's currently working. The purchaser of your sale needs to be on board to give you an extra 2 to 4 weeks or whatever timeline exists there to negotiate that. And then the seller of the home that you are purchasing needs to also be aware that you are currently in the process of selling your home, that you're going to be living there, and that that purchase for you absolutely cannot fall through, and you need some sort of assurance from them that they are selling and going to vacate at the date of closing. That's the gist and general overview of what we typically look for in that situation.
So what if there's a situation where the person put their home up for sale? It is in contract. They haven't found a place to live. They figured out that what they thought they could buy previously is no longer an option for them, and they don't have a place to go. And now they've decided, hey, you know what? I think I'll just stay here. I'm not selling. What would you call that? There's a name for it. And how does that work?
Annette, that's a layup for me. Thank you. So as Annette is smiling, unfortunately, this is a very serious situation these days because we have a lot of people in the market that are changing minds, and buyers and sellers both are becoming to be a little bit more fluid, albeit our education says otherwise to them. What typically happens is if we're on the seller side, the seller, like Annette mentioned, has no place to go, can't figure out how to get there, can't afford the place that they were hoping to purchase, and they get cold feet or whatever the situation is, they change their mind, they don't want to sell or leave the home anymore. That's called a breach of contract, and the seller at that point will be in an absolute breach of the contract. What does that mean? Every contract in New York City, but for added or altered language, in the template form states that as part of damages for the seller breaching the contract and not abiding by the terms that they agree to abide by, the purchaser has the right to sue them in court for what's called specific performance of the contract that forces their hand to sell the property under the terms of the contract. Now, that is a very serious violation and cost that is associated with such an action. So, what actually happens? There are two actions and there are two ways that this usually goes. One way is there's a resolution and settlement between the buyer and seller for some sort of expense portion that the seller will typically paid to the buyer to be released from the contract. The second way is, and this typically happens when the purchaser is an investor type, they will take the seller through the ringer and file these lawsuits and file what's called a lis pendens, which is a cloud on title against the property that will no longer allow the seller to transfer or sell the property until that cloud on title is resolved. One thing to mention, and it's very important, during the term of the litigation, no matter how much appreciation the property experiences, you will not benefit from it because it is going to be the purchaser that is suing the seller that is going to benefit from the terms of the contract, and they will purchase that property per judge's decision with the added equity and principal that has risen while you were in litigation. So it's a very tough situation, and not one that we recommend any of
Right.
our
It
clients to go
sounds
into.
like that could work out very bad for the seller. And if the buyer can afford to pay the legal fees, could be much to their advantage, because some of these things end up in court for a couple of years, right? I mean, the New York court system is bombarded with cases. And so if we're in a good market, that person obviously could gain some equity, as you're saying, because it appreciates. Now, what if it depreciated? What would happen?
Well, if it depreciated, then the buyer that is suing for specific performance has some leverage there. They can essentially try to renegotiate the terms of the contract to get the seller to the table without further litigation, or otherwise they still have to abide by the terms of the original contract. So everything is up for negotiation unless the judge puts an order out.
Okay. Some seniors, they have two-family houses and they don't use them as two-family. They end up taking out, a kitchen, which is the stove, the refrigerator basically is what makes it a kitchen. How does that affect a person trying to make a sale?
That's a great question. So the property value is going to be dependent on comparables in the market of the home. And again, I'm not a real estate agent or broker. I'm a real estate attorney. So this is just based on information and the best of my knowledge. The comparables that are looked at have to do with equal types of square footage, sizing in terms of bathrooms and bedrooms, kitchens, and the type of structure. If you are selling a home that is that is a two-family, but doesn't reflect being a two-family when the buyers are doing their walkthrough, or when their bank is doing the appraisal, you're going to lose the potential value of your home by not inserting that stove or refrigerator back into the location of where it used to be, to actually show that this is still a two-family home. And this
Right.
is something, again, this is something that usually is handled by the real estate brokerage and real estate team as part of their educational element, as far as the best way to list, present, and price for a great transaction.
Right. So in many cases, it might behoove the senior to put that refrigerator and stove back, because if you have a two-family house and the house next door is one family and it's the same square footage, the two-family would usually be worth more just because it's two-family. So now they're drastically devaluing the house by not having that there. Also, a lender might not want to make the loan on that particular house, because the income potential that the person who was buying originally figured they would have, number one, is not there. So it affects their ratios, right? And then the other thing is that the lender just might say, no, it's not a two-family. It's supposed to be a two-family, so we're not going to do the loan. So what's happening is the amount of buyers, where we already have less buyers now because of these increasing rates, we're going to have maybe even less buyers because of the situation. You might need to get a cash buyer if you're not in a position to put that other apartment back in working order as an apartment, right?
Absolutely.
So, some of the other things we wanted to talk about, Gennady, is from an attorney's point of view. what should seniors be asking about when they hire real estate people? Are there any specific things they should be able to do? Any specific designations that you might know of or anything like that?
Uh, Absolutely. In terms of figuring out who the best professional to work with in any area or field, you want to take a look at the background or credentials. If you have access to a computer, of course, the best start is with Google. The next, I would recommend that you go on the Department of State to make sure that they are validly licensed and still existing. Uh, in addition to that, as far as trade designations and that, I'm not exactly too confident or sure of when it comes to seniors, so I won't really opine on that. The questions that I ask and that I train agents on in terms of how to respond and what they should be ready with and for have to do with what are the current market conditions as far as your transactions are concerned. So we want to put the realtor in a position where they are forced to educate us on how they view the market based on their recent business and transactions. That serves several purposes. One of the purposes it serves is they will start to educate us in terms of what type of business they have done and continue to do in the current market. And two, they'll continue to educate us on what they believe we should be doing to better improve our chances in this current market. Next, especially for senior citizens, what I would be asking for is what do I need to do with my home in order to make it presentable to the best market today and to be market ready? This has to do, especially with older homes, this has to do with a lot of creativity in terms of an agent needs to understand how to picture it and what to remove from the home in order to present it in the way that it is. I see situations, depending on the type of home, where agents and brokers will actually recommend some updates and renovations before the home is listed. Why are updates and renovations recommended before the home is listed? I see recommendations. Does an agent recommend that a pre listing inspection be done on the property? These are important things to ask the agent because we as sellers would want to know what am I exposed to? What is the house exposed to in terms of further negotiations of the price after we get into a deal? So we're already reviewing what should we do with the property. We're already discussing should the property be renovated. Now, the next question that I always teach agents about is what should we do in the terms of how we market this opportunity as far as price is concerned? Now, right now, pricing is everything. You Pricing is what sells these days. So, what I educate agents on, and what agents need to be educated on, especially if one is being interviewed, they should know how to offer seller's concessions. What is a seller's concession? How can one make it attractive for potential buyers to make an offer on our property if we provide them with a seller's concession? Also, a creative method is that I like to educate agents and hope agents are picking this up. And you, when interviewing an agent, should ask, how about if we provide a credit in terms of buy down interest rates for the buyer? If we can help the buyer save on some of the cost of these interest rates, it would be a lot cheaper for the seller than eventually lowering the price because the property can't move.
That's a great
So
idea.
these are things that we kind of educate our teams on. Also, how does your agent hold open houses? Is it weekly or is it once a month? Are they trying to do open houses or walkthroughs in the evenings after you're coming home from work? you know I'm of the mindset that you want a line of people that think that they need to outbid you, that they know that there's somebody breathing down their shoulders that's looking at the property. And that can only be done in an open house where you at least have 3 to 5 families registered and ready to go. The only way
Right.
that can happen is something that's scheduled in advance enough. Weekly may be too much. So these are all things, maybe a little bit.
viewers don't understand is that by New York State law, the listing agent and the agent who would be for the buyer bringing them in is supposed to still represent the seller unless they have specifically made an agreement in writing with the buyer that they are that buyer's agent. Otherwise, they're supposed to be working on behalf of the seller. And a lot of this, you have to keep abreast of what's happening. There's a lot of changes going on, a lot of lawsuits out there in the real estate market right now. And one of the things that is up for discussion is whether or not the seller should actually be paying that buyer's agent commission. Because what has typically happened here in New York City is that our contracts are written with, it's the listing agent. And if they belong to an MLS, it's a standing contract for that MLS. And then in there, it will disclose what the different percentages are that will be paid to those other agents. And so that also is a variable that people should be aware of, that it's not one set thing. It's not just split it. So you really have to read your contract so that you know and understand what is going on. Another situation that has come up over the years, and I find this unfortunately to be more so with seniors, people think that they can take advantage of them. And sometimes they just don't pay the rent. And of course, there was during COVID, there were people who had jobs still, but they thought they could just not pay the rent. So what's a senior to do? I mean, they're living on a limited budget. Maybe they don't have a pension. They only have Social Security. And without that rent, they really can't afford to even stay there themselves. So what should they be doing about that?
No, that's a very difficult situation, unfortunately. The recourse is obviously going to be court in terms of that. There has to be a notice to vacate. There has to be a notice to terminate. And this is where you would hire an attorney that focuses their time on landlord-tenant issues. And that specific area of law that essentially is going to require you and your attorney to send a particular notice to that tenant to vacate the premises because of their breach of the lease. Then you're going to have to go through the eviction court process. In New York City and the boroughs, the eviction court process is a lengthy process. It takes sometimes years. So it's very difficult for somebody that is living and that is expecting rental income that never is received because for whatever reason our tenants are not paying, to essentially pay your expenses, whether it be your mortgage or whether it be your regular living expenses. At that point, there has to be alternatives that you're looking for, whether those alternatives have to do with some sort of buyout arrangement with that tenant to get them out as soon as possible so you can put in a paying tenant. That is one way that you can go about it. Essentially what you're doing is, and you and the tenant are having a conversation about, look, you messed up, you're not paying rent to me. I get it. I say, I'm sorry. What we'd like to do is leave this unit within the next 30 to 60 days, and you don't owe me anything anymore, or I'll even put down for you X amount of dollars for your next unit to help you, just so that we don't have to go through the next few years. You don't have the derogatory eviction mark or bad credit because of our relationship in the future if we go through court. So those are really the two most common ways that it's handled.
Great. So one of the other things people need to be aware of, if you have a tenant there and they don't move out, you could still sell that building, but understand that it might be at a drastically reduced sales price because now the person purchasing might have wanted to use that unit for maybe another relative or someone they, wanted personally to live there. Or they might have decided they wanted to use it for themselves and they need both apartments. Maybe it's, a family, son or daughter is living with them and they want to move them onto an apartment. So there's several other things to understand and consider. When you do give money to a tenant to move, it's called cash for keys. And at least that's on the real estate side, what we call it. And you also have to understand that if this was something where there was a foreclosure and it was a short sale foreclosure, the lender would actually have to approve. It would have to be disclosed that you're giving that person cash for keys. So these are little tidbits that could really get you in trouble if you don't pay attention to them. Now, what if a person has a home and now they passed away, so it went to the estate, and it wasn't in a trust where it could immediately be put up for sale? They only had a will or didn't have a will. And so now, what's that process like?
Lengthy. Welcome to New York City again, unfortunately. What we're talking about is that the good part is the property doesn't disappear. It stays with the estate of the family of the deceased. Essentially, the deceased family would have to hire a probate attorney to probate the will if one existed, or to set up an estate through court in order for the property to be sold properly. It tends to take, at this point, probably 6 to 18 months, depending on the uh, borough that you're in. So, depending on the courthouse that we'll be in. And it's a lot more expensive to do that than it is these days to hire an attorney to prepare your will, to prepare this trust, to transfer the property into the trust, so that your family, so that your heirs don't have to go through court when they have lost a loved one. So that's absolutely a benefit in hiring a trust attorney way in advance before we are expecting to no longer be here.
So, there are some agents out there that they kind of work at the courthouse and they look for these things or they buy lists, etc. What does the person, maybe they were the executor, what do they need in order to be able to properly, legally be able to list that property? And so that the seniors' estate doesn't get themselves in trouble by putting a property up where they don't have proper authority? What would that be called?
They're called letters of testamentary, and essentially what it does is the court provides instruction and details as to the limitations of the executor, if any. So what tends to happen is sometimes a court would limit the transfer of any assets to the executor, or the letters of testamentary would say that there is no limit on the transfer of the existing assets. Another caveat, these letters typically need to be within 6 months old when we are selling the home. So if they are over 6 months old, it's typically a simple process to go into the courthouse with those letters and have the court update them if there are no changes to the estate.
Perfect. I just want to take a moment to thank Brandy Wine Living at Huntington Terrace. I was at a geriatric networking meeting earlier today and knew that I would not be able to return back to my office to do this particular show, and they were kind enough to give me one of their apartments. So thank you so much to Brandy Wine Living. Also, this show is sponsored by Bresry Realty. Bresry is a real estate broker in the borough of Brooklyn. You could reach us at our office number 718-513-6002. And you could also find us at bresry.com. So, Gennady, let's say that a person has a trust. What happens? Can they just go sell the property now, or how does that work?
It's a little bit more complicated than that, but obviously within the benefits of the trust, there are also guidelines in terms of how the properties to be disposed of or handled. Again, I'm not a trust and estate attorney. I defer to people and colleagues that handle this on a regular basis. But from my experience and all of the transactions that we've dealt with, the property will be transferred by trustees of the trust if we are within an irrevocable, trust. That means that typically you, as the grantor, the person that is forming this irrevocable trust, appoint one or two or multiple trustees that will sign and execute any action of the trust. You will no longer be the owner of the property. You are no longer responsible for the property. The trustees will be handling that on behalf of the trust, because the trust will own the property. So if you are selling under a trust and your trust is irrevocable, make sure that the trustees or trustee in your trust are the ones that are executing everything. Now, if it's a revocable trust, living trust, then you are most likely going to be the trustee as well and beneficiary, that you will be the one signing on behalf of the transaction if you're going to be going up for sale.
So what I've seen sometimes is that there are some seniors who don't have any family, and or they have family and don't want to involve them. Maybe they don't feel, good about it, and they are not well, which happens many times as, people are getting to that 80 and above age. I start to see more and more reasons why they can't attend a closing. Is that something that you as an attorney could help them with? And why might it be better to ask an attorney to help with this kind of a matter than their good friend?
Well, absolutely. It's not a matter of what the connection is. It's more a matter of who's reliable. There are independent organizations that act as trustees for trusts. You pay into this on a monthly fee, just like you would pay anything else. And there will always be a trustee that's part of your trust that will be guided by the terms of the trust. If that's not a direction that you want to go to, absolutely, whoever it is that you're dealing with in establishing your trust, perhaps they will act as a trustee, if not the trustee, but one of them. Again, I defer to my colleagues all the time that are more proficient in this area than I am.
Right. What if it's not a trust that they have and they still want to have someone else, maybe you, the attorney, represent them? What document would they need to have in place to do that?
A power of attorney?
Yes, that's what we're talking about.
Okay. Yes. Well, a power of attorney absolutely is relevant. I do want to say that these days power of attorneys are scrutinized heavily, especially when we are dealing with senior citizens. I've gone as far as asking their treating physician for affidavits before we've created power of attorneys, because we want to make sure that that power of attorney is being granted and signed by a person that is fully within their right mind. Because as we can expect, that can be taken advantage of. So absolutely, power of attorneys are very important, and even more so important because they do terminate at death. Power of attorneys also, uh, as far as for sales and purchases of property, most of the time need to be specific to that transaction, so that a blanket power of attorney generally is not enough these days. So there are plenty of protections within them.
So they can't, like a durable power of attorney usually is that they could sell real estate. You're saying that there's something different from that? Can you
There,
explain on that a little more?
Sure. So within the requirements of title companies and lenders, there typically is a guideline where the power of attorney needs to specifically specify the property that's being transferred as part of that power of attorney. And the reason why they require that is obviously because title insurance is an insurance policy that is given for the transaction purchase of the property. So they want to make sure that the person that is selling is fully within their right to sign the document as the agent of the power of attorney, and that the grantor of that power of attorney was fully within their right mind to authorize the sale of this particular property, and not of a regular power of attorney that may have occurred 5 or 10 or 15 years ago.
Well, folks, I'm learning something new here today because I never heard about this before. And so now I'm thinking that if you have a power of attorney and it was done prior to maybe selling the house you had when you did the power of attorney and you've moved into a new house, maybe they need to update the power of attorney and put that address in there should they want that person to be actually able to do whatever they need to do, right?
Sure. Lenders and title companies even go as far as requiring the loan number to be input into the power of attorney, authorizing the agent to speak on behalf of the person that owes the money to the lender so that they can verify all the information at closing.
So the person would actually have to be competent enough to do that new power of attorney then. This is not for somebody who's already incompetent.
That's correct. No update should be happening on a power of attorney if somebody's mindset is no longer viable.
Okay, so what's a family to do? Their mother is now 90, they're 60, and mom needs to go to an assisted living, let's say, and they don't have the money for her to go there, and they don't have a power of attorney. What do they do then? Is there any kind of legal proceeding they can go through to maybe make that happen?
Absolutely. I believe that they can pursue an executorship where there's going to be an executor appointed to mom's estate because she's no longer within her mindset. Her mindset being well, that is. Again, something more in line with my colleague's profession that handles trust and estates. What I would also recommend in a situation like that, if there is a power of attorney that is viable, that family should look into something like a reverse mortgage. Annette, do you know anything about that?
I do know a little about those. So just to disclose, I do work for Fort Funding Incorporated, or actually it's Fort Funding Corp. Let me not misspeak. And we are located at 7016 Fort Hamilton Parkway in Brooklyn. And our phone number, just so you have it, toll free, is 877-228-4404. My NMLS number is 67606. And the company's NMLS number is 39463. Sorry to have you have to listen to all of that, but if I don't properly disclose, who knows what they'll do to me. So reverse mortgages are out there. Speaking from a real estate broker point of view, they are available for people 62 and 60 years of age. It is the HECM, home equity conversion mortgage, where the person has to be 62. That is an FHA product. It can be done as a refinance or a purchase. And then there are some jumbo products. The best thing about a reverse mortgage is not having to make any payments of principal or interest for as long as the person lives in the home and is in good standing. In other words, they pay their real estate taxes or they're having them withdrawn. They keep their homeowner's insurance up to date. It's a lot more complex than that, but that's what I'm going to limit it to for this particular conversation. If you want more information, I'm happy to, help you. Just give me a call. I do teach classes to social workers, nurses, and Gennady, I just had my CLE class, which is for lawyers, approved. It's on October 11th. So if any lawyers are listening to this, give me a jingle and I'll tell you how you can get into that class. Back to you, Gennady.
Thank you, Annette. So in terms of the benefit of such a product that you focus on to the family, is that, as you like to discuss, it allows the senior to age in place. It allows the senior to stay in their home and not have to go to a senior citizen or assisted living facility. Am I correct? Because
Yes.
There's an opportunity to take money out if there's equity in the property as part of the reverse.
Right. And one of the things that they could do, and a lot of people do not know about this, is that if they already have a reverse mortgage in place, so the intention shouldn't be, I'm going to do a reverse so I can get money to go to an assisted living. But if they have it in place and they have a line of credit, they could actually go to an assisted living for up to 6 months without any ramifications. In other words, it wouldn't be like they move, they keep their address at that house. They can't have sold the house. If they sold the house, it comes due. But they could take that money to get into the assisted living, because assisted livings, unless it's a Medicaid assisted living, most of them are private pay, and they are not going to let someone in if they can't show they have the ability to pay. And then what happens if they don't have the ability to pay? They say, okay, I'm going to sell my home. And it's kind of like you have to make a quick sale if you need the money and the person is not in a safe situation to go home. So when you have to sell in a quicker amount of time, you're usually selling for a lot less money. And so we don't want to have to bring investors in to purchase your house on 65 cents on the dollar because you want to get out of there in 2 weeks. We want to be able to put your house in this market 3-6 months, and maybe if you're unreasonable about what it's really worth today, it could be longer than that. with all of these, rising costs that are occurring. So there are a lot of advantages, and it's definitely an underutilized product. We have a lot of wealthy people also who understand the ability to have cash flow, have used reverse mortgages as kind of like their piggy bank or an investment product. There are different laws to understand. You should definitely talk to an accountant if you're going to do a reverse mortgage, because some people are used to paying mortgage payments and making deductions. When you get the reverse mortgage, you may not be able to deduct those. The only two things I understand, and check with your accountant, where you can actually make any kind of deduction on a reverse is if you were investing in real estate and using the money from that, or if you were investing in some kind of a business. But again, check with your accountant. Like Gennady likes to say, I'm not an accountant. Well, neither am I. And they will know the best and most up-to-date answer. So Gennady, what if a person has maybe physical limitations or anything like that? Is there anything that you might be able to give advice on in that area as far as getting their house sold?
Physical limitations. Well, I think there's assistance everywhere for in terms of programs. Are we referring to some sort of public programs, or are we talking about access to the property?
Well, what if, like, logistically, should they stay in the house when it's being shown? Is it maybe better for them if they do have a lot of limitations to see if they could go to assisted living temporarily? Some assisted livings do offer, they call it respite. And that is either for the family or for a person that just has to get out of a particular situation for a while. So maybe they're moving across the country to go live with their son or daughter, and they're not having the assisted living piece in their mind. So I know from my point of view, I think that seniors need to be aware that you don't have to stay long-term in an assisted living. Sometimes, depending upon the assisted living and how full they are at the time, they may allow you to stay for 30 days, which in the case where you're selling a home could be a terrific thing. Look, selling a home is an overwhelming process for people who are in good condition, right? But you're a senior, and now you see people coming in and they're moving your things, and maybe they want to take things away, and oh, you don't need this or that. Well, sometimes after you decide in the beginning and you tell them, look, I want this, 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 and this, sometimes it's better to just remove yourself from that situation than to be in the midst of it. Especially, it's not a safe situation. You're packing up cartons, you want to start to get things ready. First thing most agents will tell you is declutter the place, right? And so now you have cartons. So maybe the cartons go down into the basement, but maybe they don't all go into the basement. So it's just not a safe situation for the senior. Another thing that I will mention here is when you are showing a house, you should remove all of your medications from the medicine cabinets. People like to use your bathroom. So even if you're trying to sell on your own and you don't think that you need an agent, which would be a big mistake. However, some people, that's their choice. Okay, I still would like you to know, take your medications out of there. And if you are showing your house, you should have multiple people who know that you're showing your house at any given time. Invite a friend over or something to stay with you. Us as agents are now given safety apps. If we choose to use it, we have to use it for everyone. So when I show a property, my policy is that I take the person's picture. It actually goes into the app. I don't know if there's one for consumers. But if I say I'm going to be in that house for 2 hours because we're doing an open house and it's 2:05, trust me, alarms are going off to 6 different people, and hopefully one of them is calling the police to go to that house. It also will alert the police, but it's more useful when someone else is also calling in to say something is wrong. The person didn't answer my call. This is real. It can be a very dangerous situation, especially for seniors. They're very vulnerable. People coming into the home. So it's always good to have backup protection.
Thank you, Annette. You're definitely got my interest peaked in safety. One thing that I also wanted to mention is that if the home has already modifications made to it for senior citizens, and you're looking to, and this home is something that you're selling, make sure that you're aware of who the potential buyer is so that you can actually raise that as a good thing. So you've got handlebars, or you have special bathtubs. Maybe there's a buyer that is of age that needs that. Maybe there's a buyer that is coming in that's got parents moving in. So you can absolutely try to increase the value of these items if they already exist in the property.
Right. So are you suggesting that like knowing that you have a buyer is kind of after the fact, but I would tend to think like if there are things there that are being rented, they should just return them to the company. Like sometimes there are these very large beds that people don't usually purchase. They usually rent them. But I've had people where they want to leave it there, like, oh, I'm not dealing with it right now. When the house is sold, I'll deal with it. And it becomes harder for people to visualize what that house will look like for them. All they see is there was a sick person here, and it is a deterrent. So my advice would be to remove any of the medical equipment that you can remove. Another thing that people like to do, especially in the 5 boroughs, I find this to be more so, is that they have illegal apartments. Do you know anything about that, Gennady? Like what could happen with an illegal apartment?
Yeah, absolutely. If we're in a situation where we've got a tenant in a part of the property that isn't supposed to be separated or used as a separate unit of that property, that's going to be determined illegal. Now, if you've got a problem with that tenant and you can't close, now you have a situation not only with getting somebody out of your home, but you also have a situation with the Department of Buildings, where you are inappropriately using your property as compared to a certificate of occupancy. That will prevent you potentially from being able to sell your home. So do not segregate your property into potential either single room units or any other way that you may have it, because it's going to be an issue when you're selling.
Okay, so a person could actually get a violation for doing construction that shouldn't be done. I've come across people where these fines were $25,000. I had a guy in the Rockaways, his son, while he was out of town, he let the son take over the house, and the son decided he wanted to have a garage. And he didn't get any permits. The neighbors, of course, complained. He got a violation. And so his father then told him, get that thing out of there. And he thought he was doing the right thing. So he got rid of it. And lo and behold, they got another violation for dismantling it all without a permit. So when you do these things, there's a lot to know. Also, I have seen cases, and maybe you've come across something like this, Gennady, where a person was illegally renting and now they had a violation. And it could be a violation for really any reason. It doesn't have to just be doing construction without a permit. And now they have a tenant who's decided not to pay their rent. It's my understanding, and I don't know if you can confirm because I know you're not an eviction attorney, but that the person would not be able to take that person to court to evict them because they have a violation on their property.
I haven't quite had experience with that part, so I can't really talk about those specifics. What I can say is that I have plenty of transactions where we've got illegal tenants and we've got violations on the property, and the tenants that are in the illegal units are a lot bigger of a problem than any violation could be on any property. Violations are not typically disastrous. Violations can typically be cured by the hiring of professionals such as expediters that will tell us what needs to be done in order to rectify it. So it's just a matter of money and time. With tenants, you don't know what you're getting. So I always say let's figure out what to do with the tenant first, and then we'll worry about clearing the violations.
Okay, is there anything here that you might want to say as some parting words, Gennady?
Yeah, one thing that we didn't mention that I think is going to be very crucial for all our viewers is that when we're selling our property and when we are senior citizens, we have to take into consideration that if we have public benefits, whatever income comes in from that sale, our public benefits may suffer. So that's something that you absolutely should be speaking to a professional about. If you are a senior citizen with public benefits and selling a home, speak to your accountant. speak to a public benefit specialist to determine what, if anything, you can do to preserve those benefits. Another very important element that I think we should mention is that with the reverse mortgage that you and I discussed, there are a lot more tax savings potentially at the end than after a sale, because as we know, but we didn't get to mention, part of the reverse mortgage is that the property will no longer be left to the owner after the owner passes. So can you explain that part if I got it correctly?
Okay, so basically when someone passes away, the house would go to whoever their heirs are. So the heirs would then decide whether or not they want to purchase the property, either for the balance of the mortgage if it's lower than the appraised value. If the mortgage owed is higher than the appraised value, they only have to pay 95% of the appraised value. So let's go back to the $1 million property, and this time they owe $500,000. Let's call it 8% on the sales cost overall, and let's say, or maybe even 10% with a transfer tax, I don't know. So let's use 10%. So it's $550. The estate would have $450 if they sold it, but if they wanted to purchase the property, they would pay $500. Let's say in another example, house is worth $1 million, they owe $1.2 million, then the family would be able to purchase it for $950,000. It's always up to the bank to decide whether or not they're going to agree with that. They come in, they do their own appraisal. It's not the appraisal of your buyer or your appraisal that matters. It's the bank's appraisal that they hire that in order to figure this out.
But if I understand correctly, income tax ramifications are not the same because you don't have the seller selling it anymore with an income coming in from the sale.
Well, it depends on if the seller was alive or dead, right? So a person might decide today to sell their house for that $1 million. And they live in the house. They don't have a reverse mortgage. They're trying to decide, should I stay or should I go, kind of thing, right? So if they were to sell it and they bought it for $200,000 and it's a single family home and they were the only owner, now they had an $800,000 profit. Maybe check with your accountant, they're going to get a $250,000 exemption. So if they purchased it at $2 and a $250 exemption, they're paying taxes on $550. However, if they made a decision not to sell it and decided, okay, I'll do the reverse mortgage because I do need money, and that's really why I'm selling, I need money. So the benefit becomes now I stay in my home, I take out my $300 or $400 and I use it. So I would pay taxes on that $550 anyway. Maybe you're going to lose, depending upon your income tax bracket, 20% to, I don't know if it goes up to 35 or so. So by doing that, they're not having to pay those taxes. And then when their family inherits, depending upon where those rules are for inheritance, like what is the amount on state taxes, like as of right now, they would more than likely be in a situation that that estate would not be charged with a capital gain tax because the tax basis would have gone up to the $1 million value as opposed to that $200,000. So by selling the house, as opposed to doing the reverse, they could have ended up paying a lot more taxes as the estate. But most people they have no clue. Again, I am Annette Fisher with Fort Funding, and Fort Funding is a licensed mortgage broker in New York State, New Jersey, Connecticut, Pennsylvania, and Florida. And you could also find out more about the company at Fort Funding, FortFunding.com/about. We'll give you the details about our licensing and where our branches are.
Thank you, Annette. It was a pleasure being on the show. I hope some value was given out.
I think that a lot of value was given out. If they had to pay for this, it would be quite a bit of money to sit with an attorney and ask them question after question. So thank you for coming in today. Thank you for being a sponsor on our show. We definitely enjoyed having you here, and I'll see you soon, Gennady.
Our pleasure. Thank you so much. Have a great day.
Thank you. Take care.